I'd like to welcome you back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about how I believe that it was far more difficult to keep scripture and that we don't have a reason not to keep the Torah today. Um, and I'm going to back up or support my beliefs based on these three key pieces of evidence, which is religious freedom, another one is access to the scripture, and then the literacy rate of the population. So one is going to be the lack of religious freedoms, because for most of history, religious freedom, it was rare. I would think about medieval Europe, and the religious tolerance was not considered a virtue, and persecution for non-religious conformity was common. I think about the massacre at Bizzers in 1209 and other episodes during the Crusade. Um, People face dangers for being part of a minority faith if they, deviated from a state-sanctioned religion. Even some regions, like in Transylvania, by the late 16th century, they experimented with religious tolerances, but then after that, they reverted back when the rulers changed. So, in contrast to the United States today, our Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, which allows individuals to practice any faith that you want to. So, one, they had persecution and they lacked religious freedoms. So, number two, I believe that they had limited access to scripture before the printing press. So, the printing press was invented in the 15th century. And before that, all the Torah scrolls and other religious books were hand copied manuscripts. And this made them extremely rare and expensive, and they just weren't accessible to many people outside of the religious elites. So the printing press, it absolutely revolutionized access to religious texts, which included the Torah and other commentaries, because the first printed Hebrew books appeared in the late 15th century, and by the 16th century, millions of books had been produced. So that's my second point, was limited access to scripture before the printing press. And my third point was just low literacy rates. In antiquity and in the Middle Ages, literacy rates were extremely low. In Roman Palestine, for example, estimates suggest that only 3% of the population could read, and this 3% weren't spread across the region. They were concentrated amongst urban elites and religious leaders. Even in the late Middle Ages, and I'm only referencing Western Europe because that's where we have a lot of evidence and documentation. But even during the Middle Ages, the literacy rates were still below 20%. Now, when you compare that to today, literacy rates in the United States, they're close to 100%. And then we have educational resources to study these like religious texts. Like, for example, I could see a religious text in Aramaic, and I could just copy and paste that into artificial intelligence, and it's going to spit out what the text states. So that's just something right to think about. When you combine those three, one, they couldn't study outside of the state sanctioned religion. Number two, they had limited access to study. So even if you did study something different, well, you didn't have access to it. Only a certain people had access to it. Where if you had a community of 1,000, you may have had a couple of manuscripts at that time. And then three, even if you did have it, right? Well, you couldn't read it. So right now, we really have no excuse. We get to research whatever we want to research. We get to read it. We have access to it, and we get to practice it. I think we are at a time where we're not going to receive the same level of grace as before due to our complacency. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a great day.